If you look for me tomorrow and you can't find me, always remember that with education, hard work, and a lot of faith, you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. Those were the words spoken to a 5-year-old girl by her mother. That little girl is the woman standing before you today. It was the night after the governor's visit. I'd been selected to welcome the governor and present him with a bouquet of flowers. My parents seemed really proud that of all the little girls in the town, their little princess had been selected to perform this seemingly important task. My dad, who comes from a tiny village in the oil-rich but highly impoverished Niger Delta region of Nigeria, was a civil servant with the local government council that the governor was visiting. My mom made me this fancy little traditional outfit from one of our favorite hand-woven traditional akwete wrappers. And I still remember very vividly the smile on her face as she adorned me with coral beads before making our way to the local government council secretariat where the governor was to be received. The rich cultural heritage of the Ijaw people was on full display, with cultural dancers all dressed up in traditional costumes. It was in the midst of all these festivities that I asked my mother if I could someday become the governor when I grew up. My mom looked me straight in the eyes without hesitating, and in the most reassuring tone responded, "Of course you can. You can be anything you want to be when you grow up, provided you take your education seriously, work hard, and have a lot of faith." That was a defining moment of my childhood. And in the preceding years that followed, my mom literally would wake me up at very odd hours of the night or early hours of the morning. You know those time of day when you're actually enjoying your sleep and then she taps me on the shoulder and wakes me up to have these very adult conversations with me about the future. And one of the things she would always say to me was to remind me of her words. To be honest, most of the things my mother spoke to me at that age never really made any sense to me. Like when she made, if you're African, you would understand what I'm going to say. Like when she made me make this commitment that she'd be the first person to know when my period showed up. That was weird. As a matter of fact, I found it very intrusive. It was almost as if she was preparing me for a future without her. And I just couldn't get it. If you look for me tomorrow and you can't find me, how is that even possible? Look for you. I just couldn't place that. But then, eventually, the weight of my mother's words finally hit me when life took a dramatic and unexpected turn with the sudden death of my mother. It seemed like my entire world had come crashing, and the prospect of fulfilling my dreams seemed to have been aborted prematurely. Her words became the driving force that propelled me to pursue my dreams against all odds, surmounting every obstacle that life threw on my path. I saw education as my lifeline, my only lifeline, and worked real hard to remain at the top of my class. I was determined that nothing was going to stand in the way of my dreams of a better future for me and my 4 siblings. Not even the psychological, physical, and emotional abuse from my stepmother, a woman my dad had remarried after the loss of my mother. And whenever things got really tough at home, guess what I'd do? My dreams became my escape, a place where I could retreat into and envision the future. In a bid to lighten the burden on my dad, I opted to go live with some relatives with hopes that they'd help sponsor my university education because I really wanted this education so desperately. But it wasn't even long before those hopes were dashed. And I realized that I had to fight for my dreams. At barely 16, I got my first job as a receptionist in a hospital. At the same time, I enrolled for a diploma program in law. I'd work from 8 p.m. at night to 8 a.m. in the morning and then go to school. Now, combining work and school at the age of 16 wasn't the easiest thing to do, but if education was my only lifeline, then I was willing to pay the price. This is not just my story. This is the story of millions of young girls across sub-Saharan Africa, where the right to education still remains a privilege that only a few can afford. According to UNICEF, of the 132 million out-of-school girls globally, about 49 million, which is about a third, one-third of those girls actually live in sub-Saharan Africa. Interestingly, Nigeria is recorded to have the highest number of out-of-school girls. But for my mother, I could have easily been part of that statistics. I often wonder what my life would have been like if I didn't have access to education. Now, towards the end of my university education, I started thinking deeply about my future. And for me, joining the Living Faith Commission, Living Faith Church, and learning about the principles of faith was the beginning of my self-discovery journey. I realized that life was not just about me and my family, and I was actually created for impact. And the passion to be the change I wanted to see in the world was ignited. I got involved in student politics, was elected first female vice president of the National Union of Bayelsa State Students, and subsequently represented Nigeria at the United Nations Youth Assembly. Representing Nigeria on a global stage, for me, literally brought the words of my mother to life, that with education, hard work, and a lot of faith, I could be anything I wanted to be, and there were no limits whatsoever. Having accomplished my dreams of becoming a lawyer, I proceeded to the University of Aberdeen, where I obtained a master's degree in oil and gas law. Having completed my education in Aberdeen, I had this burning desire, burning passion to return back to Nigeria, because I was convinced that I had a role to play in changing the narrative of not just my family, but the narrative of other girls across the continent of Africa. So I packed my bags and returned to Nigeria as soon as I dropped my pen. It was with this burning passion that I joined the services of Nigeria's foremost agency responsible for capacity development in the oil and gas sector, and subsequently became the youngest member of a male-dominated management. Confronted by a number of systemic barriers, gender, religious, ethnic, I realized that even though I had a seat on the table, as one of only 4 women and the only member of the management team from the entire Niger Delta region, I still had to fight in order to be the change I wanted to see. With the support of a remarkable team, I was principal in introducing and shaping several new capacity building policies and initiatives, including a special training and educational scheme targeted at underserved youth from the Niger Delta and across Nigeria. For the very first time since the establishment of the agency in 1973. I was also principal in initiating collaborations between the agency, federal government agency, and about 9 institutions across the United States, United Kingdom, Norway, China, Malaysia, and South Africa. In 2014, I championed the move to train young Nigerians as internationally certified commercial helicopter pilots for the petroleum industry in Nigeria. Over 500 young men and women have been impacted and completely transformed because one woman secured a seat at a table that was critical to changing the trajectory of the lives of these young people. From Rukaya, the young lady from Katsina State, northern Nigeria, who shattered the glass ceiling to become the first female pilot from her state, to Alozie, a brilliant young lady from the Niger Delta, who, having successfully completed a PhD in international development, was offered a position in a top-ranking university in the UK. Alozie is now currently sponsoring the education of all of her siblings back home in Nigeria. The list is endless, but perhaps the most inspiring of all of them, or one of the most inspiring, I must say, is the story of Oluchi. Oluchi was a young girl from the eastern part of Nigeria who had spent the most part of her life as domestic help to relatives because her widowed mother could not afford to sponsor her and her 5 siblings to school. Oluchi has now graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in international business and economy from a top-rated university in the United States. And tell you what, Oluchi is now not only responsible for sponsoring her siblings back home in Nigeria, but just last week, I received a photograph from Oluchi of a house Oluchi was building in the village for her mother, her widowed mother. Now, following the economic realities in 2016, the various scholarship programs were discontinued for lack of funding. That was when it became apparent to me that for Goal 4 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved, we cannot solely depend on governments. Thus, I decided to move on and leverage on the enormous experience I had gathered working in public service to seek other more sustainable means to continue to pursue my passion for education of the girl. So I established the Center for Gender Equality, Education and Empowerment, CGEEE, a non-profit focused on promoting gender representation in leadership and empowering vulnerable girls in Africa through education, mentoring, and skills acquisition. The CGEEE is now impacting even more lives, many more lives than I could ever have imagined. Like Amina, the 12-year-old girl who dropped out of school because her parents were victims of the insurgency in northern Nigeria. Amina, who lives in one of Nigeria's internally displaced persons camp, shared with me her dreams of becoming a medical doctor and someday finding the cure for HIV/AIDS. Amina's education is now being sponsored alongside with 9 other girls from the internally displaced persons camp by the CGEEE. Like Carla Tabrosa, a young girl from Mozambique who dropped out of school after losing both parents till her paths crossed during a humanitarian mission to Maputo. Carla is now back in school in Maputo, studying mathematics and computer science under the CGEEE scholarship. I have literally seen how education and gender representation can transform not just a family or a community, but an entire nation. And that is what fuels my passion for education of the girl child. Gender representation benefits everyone because when one woman wins, everyone wins. When one woman is on the table, it is usually not just about her. She brings the entire family, community, and everyone else to the table. This is apparently why when you take a look at countries that have achieved gender parity, are doing much better in terms of poverty reduction, education, improved standard of living, and healthcare. Now, one reason why I believe advocating for gender representation is very key is because eliminating gender gaps in education does not necessarily produce equal life outcomes for women, as gender inequality remains deeply rooted in the economic, political, and social spheres. Thus, it is not enough to equalize education because everyone is talking about, equal opportunities when it comes to education, but that's really not enough. We must work to ensure that women are given a seat at the decision-making table. I'm talking about women having the opportunity to utilize the human capital, especially when it comes to policy making and implementation at all levels of government. Now, as the world begins to embrace the new normal, where technology, innovation, and big data practically define every aspect of the human life, access to quality education is even more critical now more than ever in shaping the future. Therefore, we can no longer continue to leave one half of our population behind. What is the possibility of attaining Goal 4 and 5 of the United Nations Sustainable Goals? We have just 9 years left, barely 9 years left, to 2030. I believe that Goal 4 and 5 of the SDGs would not be actualized even in another century if the structural barriers to inclusive education and gender representation are not adequately or sufficiently addressed in laws, policies, budgets, investments, interventions at all levels across the continent. But beyond the government and international community, I believe we all have a role to play. We all have a responsibility in changing the narrative. We do not have to wait for 257 years to close the gender gaps as projected by the World Economic Forum. Of what good is all of your education, qualifications, influence, and wealth if you're not impacting lives or making a difference in the world? One positive thing that has come out of the ongoing pandemic is the reawakening of the human spirit, our shared humanity. Therefore, as citizens of the world, we can no longer sit on the sidelines. Imagine a world where we all decide to take action and either sponsor a girl's education or at least use a voice to stand up for equality. Then one girl, one woman at a time, we can change this narrative to the betterment of Africa and the world at large.